Tantor Audio, a division of recorded books, presents How to Write Like Tolstoy, a journey into the minds of our greatest writers, by Richard Cohen, narrated by Richard Cohen. The book is dedicated to Tim Dickinson. Preface. 2 epigraphs. The first is from Paris Review. Peter Carey, I was finally a writer. Interviewer, what was it that was clicking? Carey, age, experience, a simpler form, practice, reading, influence, getting beyond influence. Second epigraph, attributed to Somerset Maugham. There are 3 rules for writing a novel. Unfortunately, no one knows what they are. At a New Year's Eve dinner party in Los Angeles, sometime in the 1980s, the magician Ricky Jay was entertaining his fellow guests with elaborate tricks, using a simple deck of cards when one of his co-diners said, "Come on, Ricky, why don't you do something truly amazing?" After an awkward moment, for all the tricks had been amazing, Jay asked the guest to name a card. "The 3 of hearts," the man replied. Jay shuffled the pack, gripped it in his right hand, then sprung it, cascading all 52 cards, so that they flew the length of the dining table and pelted an open wine bottle. "What was your card again?" 3 of hearts." "Look in the bottle." The man did as bidden, and found, curled inside the neck, the 3 of hearts. Any good magician's effects, his tricks of illusion or distraction, are akin, in at least the sense of amazement they induce, to what great writers do. Vladimir Nabokov once referred to the flawless magic of Tolstoy's style. Take the scene in Anna Karenina, where Konstantin Levin, a 32-year-old landowner, proposes to Princess Ekaterina Kitty Alexandrovna Sketbatskaya. Levin is a passionate yet shy aristocrat who, unlike his Moscow friends, lives in the country on his large estate. He actually proposes twice. On the first occasion, Kitty, just 18, clumsily turns him down, telling him that her marrying him is impossible. She believes she's in love with the handsome Count Alexei Vronsky, and that he will soon propose to her. Vronsky regards his flirting with Kitty as mere sport and turns his attentions to Anna. Levin is crushed by Kitty's refusal and returns to his estate, abandoning any hope of marriage and resolving to forget Kitty. With his earnestness and soul-searching, his concern for equality, and his committed life on a country estate, Levin shares many similarities with his creator. Consciously so. In Russian, Levin means of Lev, and Lev is the spelling of Tolstoy's first name. In some ways, he's a bumbling figure, a little easy to mock, but our hearts go out to him, and we long for Kitty to change her mind, but can't guess how it will come about after so much misunderstanding. Eventually, a mutual cousin manoeuvres the 2 of them so that they find themselves alone in a family drawing-room. Kitty goes to a card table, sits down, and taking a piece of chalk, starts to draw circles on the green cloth. For a while, neither of them speaks. Kitty's eyes, Tolstoy tells us, shine with a gentle gleam. Levin leans over, takes the chalk from her and writes WYSIIWIITOA. The novel goes on. These letters were the initials of the words, "When you said, 'It is impossible,' was it impossible then or always?" It was highly unlikely that Kitty would be able to make out this complicated question. All the same, Levin looked at her as if his life depended on whether she could guess these words or not. She glanced back at him gravely, then, resting her forehead on her hand, tried to decipher it. Occasionally she would look up at him, asking him with her eyes, "Is what I think right?" "I know what it is," she said at last, blushing. "What is this word?" he asked, pointing to the I of the word impossible. That stands for impossible, but the word is not right." He quickly rubbed out what he had written, gave the chalk to her, and stood up. She wrote Tincad, At once his face lit up. He'd understood the reply. Then I could not answer differently. He looked at Kitty timidly. Only then? Yes, but now? Read this. I'll tell you what I wish very much. She quickly traced the initials TYMFAFWTP. This meant that you might forgive and forget what took place. He seized the chalk with trembling fingers, and crushing it, wrote down the initials of the words, I have nothing to forgive and forget. I have never ceased to love you. Kitty looked at him, and her smile died away. I understand, she said, in a low voice. I first read this scene when I was 20, have reread it many times since, and still wonder at its effect on me. How could a combination of words on a page, translated words, so take over my inner world? How had Tolstoy created an encounter that enraptured me, making me feel for these two make-believe characters so strongly, and indeed miss supper in College Hall as a result? Later, I discovered that the chalk game was a retelling of Tolstoy's real-life proposal to Sonia Bears, just as the scene in which Levin insists on showing his future wife the diaries recounting his youthful debaucheries also came straight from the author's own experiences. How had Tolstoy taken such intimate events and spun them into fiction? This is what the current book attempts to pin down, with a deck that spans a lifetime of reading. "Who cares for you?" cries Alice, about to step out of her wonderland. "You're nothing but a pack of cards." Only we do come to care. That is where the magic comes in. Of course, a novelist isn't just performing a trick. He's creating a whole world that takes in themes, character, argument, cultural contexts, and much else besides. But don't forget that sense of magic and wonder, the secret in the bottle. I was an only child, brought up in a seaside resort of Brighton on England's south coast, and spent much of my early years with books. I devoured comics too, some half-dozen a week, identified totally with William Brown, while also taking in such British creations as Jennings, Desperate Dan, and Billy Bunter along the way, before graduating to Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, still the only book I've read 10 times, Kidnapped, and all of Stevenson, Jules Verne, John Buchan, the 39 Steps, and the man who held up a hand which lacked 3 fingers, Edith Nesbit, most of Dumas and Rider Haggard, then, I confess, every single Agatha Christie story, and so on and on. Becoming involved in the lives of fictional characters hasn't only been my main pastime, it's shaped my moral world. Besides my own writing, I've been editing other people's prose since 1969, working on most kinds of fiction and non-fiction. A short list would include Kingsley Amis, Anthony Burgess, Sebastian Faulks, Jean Auel, Fay Weldon, John le Carré, A. Alvarez, Victoria Glendinning, Richard Holmes, V.S. Pritchett, Hilary Sperling, Madeleine Albright, Simon Winchester, Vanessa Redgrave, Diane Fossey, Studs Terkel, John Keegan, and Jonathan Spence. I've also spent several years as a visiting professor in creative writing. This book describes how any 3 of hearts ends up inside the bottle, how the authors I've read and worked with came to compose their books, and how they made their creative choices, for good and occasionally for bad. How to Write Like Tolstoy began as an outflow of my university teaching. However, as the book took shape, my aims evolved too. Although a secondary purpose is to give practical writing advice, I became swept up in how great novelists had dealt with particular problems, how Charles Dickens and George Eliot, for instance, tackled the business of rounding off a novel, how William Faulkner experimented with different narrators and points of view, or how Elmore Leonard polished his use of dialogue. I've written about what I hope will catch the attention of anyone who lights up when they read imaginative literature of real quality. The American writer and teacher Richard G. Stern said that he would never hesitate to bring into his classes the work of masters. This, he explained, wasn't meant...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?